Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk Ascension of Duran campaign series. There's two of them. Created by Whiplash, also known as Mantids and Mantis Screamer, and probably three other names. So the first campaign was made in 2007. I do not actually have a month for that. Maybe the creator can post in the comments if he remembers. I do have, I think, a month for the other one. Oh no, I don't have a month for that one either, but that was 2009. I knew that already. So, first things first. The creator is actually still active, which is very rare for any campaign that is over 10 years old. So, one of the things that I'll be doing here as a bit of a forward is sort of addressing the concept of revisiting Ascension of Duran, and whether or not there's really any value in that exercise. And I guess I'll try to draw some comparisons to other campaigns that I've seen revisited and other campaign projects that I've seen the attempts for, or I've heard behind the scenes that somebody's trying to update something or anything of that nature, and try to add some color to my analysis of this, because I'll just come right out and say it, I don't think the campaign is worth revisiting in the first place. Now, that's different from saying that there's no value in revisiting it, because should you want to sort of dust off your role as a campaign creator and work on a campaign again, and the easiest thing for you to do in your mind is to make a second attempt of your old work and bring it in line with more modern standards, sure, that is potentially something that you can do. And then maybe there's not so much of an attachment to the end result, and you can just use it as a bit of a tech demo of your current skills and reminding yourself what's possible and what you actually like, and could even be a good test to see if you're really even interested in pursuing further custom content development. Now, obviously, if that were the case, then I would, generally speaking, challenge you to go in and try to create a solid fundamental project, a foundationally solid project. And this campaign series doesn't really allow for that outcome unless you drastically re-engineer the entirety of the campaign. That being, you cut all the micro missions and convert them either into mission briefings for the macro missions or fully fledged macro missions, because without extensive modding, Starcraft cannot support actual gameplay and expression and engagement in a micro sense. And as somebody who has recently endeavored to make a micro experience, I can tell you that the end result is not necessarily worth the insane amount of man hours required. And that was with somebody helping me. So least of all, if you're trying to do all that yourself. Now, unfortunately, I can't even continue down this hypothetical of you trying to make a really, really solid project out of this overall experience, because I know that Whiplash intends to update this for working with Remastered, which includes all of the horrendous graphical choices and all of the shortcomings of that particular platform. That being, you can't use most of the advanced AI functionality, you can't do advanced modding, and you can't make functional levels without them looking like ass due to the insane ramps that Blizzard decided was fitting for the professional scene. Mind you, the most professional maps don't even use them because they're even worse than what we already were using, which were already terrible. So, that out of the way, we already understand that Whiplash's motivation is not to make a solid, fundamentally speaking, project. We already understand that he's simply doing it perhaps for an attachment to the original project. In that sense, all I can say is if you actually have no interest in producing further content after you remaster Ascension of Duran and make it compatible with the latest version of the game, which, mind you, you will have to maintain for all eternity, as patches will continuously break your project forever. Assuming that is exactly what you intend to do, and you don't really care about making content after that, it is an exercise in futility. Not only will you have to indefinitely support this custom campaign update that you are working on, you will also have to deal with, once again, releasing a shoddy and incomplete project, because only shoddy, incomplete projects can even exist in the remastered space. That is not a matter of opinion. That is simply an objective fact when you look at what is possible to make in remastered. Take it from somebody who has still made the only quality custom RTS mission in that entire platform. and take it from somebody who is never going back there again. That being said, there are a few things that you can learn if you actually are interested in furthering your place as a custom content developer, furthering your craft and refining your skills. If that is indeed the case, you can strap yourself in for the ride, and we'll go through the campaign, because now is where I end the foreword, having espoused my warnings and done away with any would-be civility when it comes to the whole idea of updating your project. I will take a brief sort of tangent and talk a little bit about updating projects in a more broad spectrum analysis, as opposed to zooming in specifically on the concept of updating Ascension of Duran. And I think it's kind of going to echo a lot of what I just said, but we're going to be talking about it given a few other examples. I'm obviously planning on updating not only Hydra, which is a campaign that I did release in Remastered, but also in Consummate, which is a campaign I released before Remastered even came out. And in Consummate is a campaign with only 6 missions, similar to, in mission count anyway, similar to the first campaign of Ascension of Duran, and I believe the second as well. Obviously in isolation, not holistically. And it is a campaign that, as Ascension of Duran does, exists within Starcraft's confines as far as the lore is concerned, although I make it a point to focus on my own characters because I am not very fond of fanfictioning existing characters and providing them with a continuation of a story that I myself do not find particularly compelling. So instead, I choose to use the platform of Starcraft, the universe in which we are all familiar, or with which we are all familiar, to create compelling stories about characters you've never heard of before, and characters you may forget forever after, but at the very least, the journey is intended to be high quality. And it's certainly not going to be a canon character that gets fanfictioned into my project. That would be a little embarrassing. That being said, obviously there's a large amount of work ahead of me to update that project, and that project is a product of a much more modern development cycle with much more modern tools and tool devs available than what Whiplash worked with when it comes to Ascension of Duran. And I'm still finding a lot of work ahead of me because I am thinking of a complete reimagination where I remake every single map, rewrite every single AI, and retool every single script, while also adding at least one new map, extending many of the game's limits so that I can add more to the game, and ultimately making use of a significant amount of tech enhancements like better custom AI and all that stuff, such that I can create an actual RTS experience and not the stripped down one I was settling for when it comes to the original development of In Consummate, when I was still refining my skills and understanding what it even took to make a quality RTS experience within the confines of Brood War's limited engine. Now, as somebody who is attempting something similar in theory to what Whiplash is attempting, or says that he's attempting, as it has been in limbo for a while, he himself said so in the comments. That being said, I don't think that the comparison is a true one where you can easily draw a lot of parallels. It's simply that I'm revisiting a campaign I made, and he's revisiting a campaign he made. But I'm not changing versions, and this is a campaign I made less than 3 years ago, and obviously his is much further out and had a lot more time to be analyzed and considered as far as its quality is concerned. And also had probably, I guess, more of an impact when it first came out because he released it to a sort of community that was much larger in number of individuals interested than the community that I released it to. Now, you can point to some of the video playthroughs of the campaign that are out there and have accrued X number of thousands of views, but YouTube views do not make a community. They're simply a stat that you can choose to feel good about or choose to ignore, the latter of which is infinitely more healthy for your mindset. And the number of individuals who have reached out to me publicly or privately about the campaign, who have responded to forum threads or Discord server messages or whatever, those people are most likely smaller than the people who recognize Ascension of Duran and had posted about it during its release or thereafter. That being said, that still doesn't really allow me to understand where Whiplash is coming from when it comes to actually wanting to update this campaign, because I can't imagine going back to, for example, my own campaign that I made 3 years ago in Consummate and saying, well, this is okay, I just need to give it a new coat of paint and update it for remastered. I can't really sympathize with his position. Not that I am fully aware of what that is, but just the idea that that's your course of action, updating it for an inferior custom content platform while you know it is inferior, and realizing how many of the limitations that you already railed against when you were making your campaign originally are still in place, or sometimes even worse, depending on your platform decision and depending on the issue at hand. I just can't imagine making that decision to begin with, especially when you actually do some risk assessment and get a little bit of progress done on the update just to figure all of this stuff out and see how bad it really is. I think there's a reason the project is in purgatory, and part of it may be Whiplash's dedication and discipline, but I have a feeling it's in large part due to the limitations of Remastered by itself. Not to necessarily make any excuses for or against him, but simply explaining the situation. Obviously, if even finished for Remastered, it precludes me from playing it because I'm never reinstalling the remaster, so that's not happening anyway, but I think it makes sense to concede that there is on paper a similarity between somebody like me or any of the other individuals who have been interested in returning to older projects and updating them. Sometimes it's not even their project, like for example, UED Commander updated Alternate and then made the Brood War version of that. And now himself knows the dangers of going back and remastering it, if you will, and porting it to a superior custom content platform in his case. The danger being that he will spend an eternity on the project because he cares about its quality. He understands that it's not a decision to be taken lightly. One that I don't know if Whiplash really did understand when he was sitting down to do it. And obviously there's plenty of other individuals out there who have tried to make updates to their projects, and maybe it does seem similar to the average individual who just hears about it in passing, more or less. Ultimately, I don't think it is the same in this case. Now, I think that Whiplash really needs to figure out if he's interested at all in learning from the experience of updating his old stuff. If not, and it's just meant as a personal love letter to his own work, well, for one, I don't know why you would necessarily feel the need to release that. And for another, I don't really see the value in that activity by itself. So the ability for me to actually understand and sympathize with the position of such an individual is obviously lacking. So what exactly makes Ascension of Duran a project that should not be revisited, unless you are doing so for reasons that are utterly outside the scope of updating a project and learning from that experience? Well, part of it is that if you're not interested in learning, you really shouldn't be doing anything, because the goal of any action is to improve yourself, i.e. learning. And at this point, I think that I've made my stance on that relatively clear. But Ascension of Duran itself is flawed across many aspects. I actually think that the most debilitating prospect of the entire project happens to be its story and the way that it is presented to the player. In theory, you could fix an issue with the story just by changing some lines of dialogue, or perhaps changing the quote-unquote choreography, i.e. the location in which you are showing a certain event, or the setting of a cutscene, or something like that. In this particular case, though, it really needs a much more thorough look over. For example, there is the second micro mission in the first campaign where you are dealing with a boss fight. That institutes a whole list of issues, not the least of which is apparently there's supposed to be some resolution of a conflict between Xerius and Duran, yet we're not even aware that Duran has ever met Xerius up until this point. Obviously this conflict begins, I suppose, in this particular mission, and Xerius just comically teleports behind Duran and steals the crystal away, only for, in the, I believe, very next mission, to be mind-controlled or bent to his will or some such nonsense, because the Maelstrom, aka Maelstrom, just a typo in the briefing, because what is spell check? Maelstrom Crystal ends up allowing Duran to control him or something, and I don't know. It's supposed to be some reveal that, of course, this is a Xel'Naga artifact, and Duran is, at least in some way, shape, or form, linked to them, I believe. Maybe he wasn't Xel'Naga in this lore. I might be conflating that with the StarCraft 2 nonsense, but clearly Whiplash had in mind the idea that this would be an epic moment. But it's lacking in all impact because of the fact that we already know Duran is serving some higher power from playing Brood War and, witnessing that secret mission. And as unfortunate as that secret mission actually is, it ends up being something that Whiplash apparently forgets about himself. I mean, he runs with the premise, but he forgets that we already witnessed it. We don't need this twist. It's more like the idea of, treat that as an event, that reveal as an event, and maybe give us a novel perspective on it. We almost had this sort of thing happen when Duran was meeting with some mercenary groups. The Quetz guy, Captain Quetz. Unfortunately, that gentleman basically had 2 lines in the first campaign, and he only really ever ended up having any quote-unquote impact in the second campaign and later on. We still never really got any character development for literally anybody, including Duran, in this entire production. Not the least of which, the problem of this issue is the fact that we don't relate to any of these characters. We don't give a shit about whatever they're doing. We have no understanding of what their motivations or goals are. They seem to be more like cutouts that are there to progress the plot, much like the random OC characters that get thrown in at the final mission of the first campaign. There's a general and an anime Protoss, and both of them die on the spot in that mission, and are your objectives to kill them in a sort of free-for-all-esque take on True Colors, the original Brood War, or the Brood War mission, the 5th Zerg mission for Brood War. And that's just a disaster unto itself because of the fact that there's so much pre-play stuff. We will get into that later when we're dissecting the gameplay, but the fact that we just write out these new characters as soon as they get shown up, and one of them has the only voiced dialogue in the entire fucking campaign, is very confusing. Azirius and crew lore exist only to add some approximation of depth, aka there's some weird conspiratorial plot going on, but we're never given any understanding as to why Krulor wants to betray Kerrigan, and also why he's unique in that, if the explanation is simply that Krulor is a Cerebret and Kerrigan enslaved him against his will and he wants to rebel, something similar to the whole Lich King nonsense in Sylvanas X Lich King X Arthas /fic that was Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne. Perhaps it's something like that, but then why is crew lore unique and none of the other Cerebrets? For example, fucking Thor. I can't believe he called a Cerebret Thor. Fucking Thor is subservient until the end, also written out unceremoniously by you so happening to kill him after he pranks you or something. I don't even know what the fuck happened in that mission. That was weird because we started out with +4 shields or something. So just reminding everybody of what a disaster we've been through and all that stuff. It's really confusing to me how anybody could have taken the plot seriously and the characters seriously, because the characters themselves don't feel like characters most of the time. Duran doesn't even feel like a character, and he's the fucking namesake of the project, the titular protagonist, the most important character to the entire fucking thing, and he's not even written in a way that makes any sense. We don't even know what his motivations are, because he's not the same Duran as the Duran that we experienced from Blizzard. At least then we could sort of abstract that he's a turncoat and he has his own agenda, even though we don't know what that agenda is until a secret mission that you probably didn't even play the first time you played the campaign because you didn't even know it existed. And on top of that, he still seemed more sensible then, which is really just by comparison. It's not because Blizzard did a good job of the writing of their story. But, Whiplash's writing in this particular case is crazy. It's so ass backwards in terms of how it tries to present a conflict. And half the time you don't know why the parties that are fighting here are fighting, and you don't even know what they're fighting for. Like, not only do you not understand how this conflict came to be, but you most of the time don't even understand the excuse that the briefing gave you for why you're doing what you're doing. Not to say nothing of the fact that the lifeless contortions of characters and factions that are present as AI enemies in this campaign really do not do the project justice in terms of presenting a story, because whatever nonsense and drivel we hear in or read in the rushed briefings of this project result in, just going in one ear and out the other, and we play the brain dead campaign itself, and the gameplay does the rest of the brain deadening for us. We don't even really have to work to forget, because everything is so banal and boring in this project, presented deadpan, like randomly killing a Cerebrate and then saying, oh, by the way, he was Thor. Like, shit like this is very confusing. Just like the sudden thinking to himself, why aren't my arbiters coming me from Xerius, only for Duran to read his mind and say, actually, that's my crystal, and your arbiters are dead, by the way, even though we didn't kill any arbiters. Okay. That seems like something that maybe if the player had actually done some arbiter killing and that was an objective that Duran mentioned, then we could be let into a little bit of the grand plan Duran had, and it could have been presented as such as the player actually doing something. Also, the fact that there's a player character at all, I'm still not even sure if that's true, because sometimes Kerrigan just says Cerebrate, and I think she's talking to us, but maybe she's talking to Thor, and I think Thor says Cerebrate. So if that's the case, obviously he's talking to us. It's just very confusing. It's very strange. Ultimately, because of the fact that there's no voice acting beyond the one fucking line that I mentioned, and the unit responses for Xerius recorded by Mesk, including a random ad-libbed, ADR'd line of dark energy that just gets cut off harshly at the end. That's psychotic enough, but the fact that there is no voice acting makes it even harder to relate to any characters or understand whatever the fuck they're trying to get at and what their motivations are and who they are, just what their characteristics are. Forget about what they're trying to do in this fuck up of a story. So that's a big deal. That's a big problem when it comes to trying to relate to what's going on, and even to align yourself not only with your favorite characters or who you're rooting for, but just to orient yourself when it comes to understanding what the fuck is happening. You just don't understand it at all. You never get it. And it never becomes clearer, really. The only thing that you get clarity-wise is an understanding that you're not meant to understand anything here. No effort was made, no attempt was paid to actually engage the player in the story. Certainly not in the gameplay department either, which is where we can shift our focus to now. The gameplay of Ascension of Duran is one of two things, but above all, it is tedious. Either it is a grind of a bunch of static enemies in a micro-installation type mission, or it is a grind of a bunch of pre-placed enemies, improperly set up AI scripts, infinite money, and you just having to go and find all of the engagement yourself because the AIs attack with 3 Zerglings or 3 Zealots. This kind of gameplay was already so tired and boring for everybody involved when this campaign came out in 2007 and its sequel came out in 2009. And yet, rather than fix it for the sequel, Whiplash doubles down on it and gives you ridiculous upgrades and all this other junk. It's just insane to think about. It's just crazy to think that this is how he handles AI not being a challenge to players. He runs AI that break, and he gives them a bunch of starting units and resources, and just expects that to occupy the player's time. Well, most people, myself included, if I were not streaming this and planning to review it later on, would have jumped fucking ship immediately after the first mission, probably before even completing it, where the level design is indicative of what you're going to see for all of the remaining macro missions in the campaign. You running straight head first down a very linear path until you wipe the entire map clean of enemy dots. Meanwhile, this non-responsive, non-competitive AI will at best annoy you as it tries to defend itself, break and overbuild text structures because you ran that script multiple times and you didn't even do any testing to see if that would be the result. You didn't look up any information about AI that was publicly available since 2001 at the latest. And you still expected this to occupy my time, to compete for my time as a player, as an individual who could be doing literally anything but play custom campaigns. It just shows no respect for the player and no respect for yourself to release something like this. And this is something that we're seeing day in and day out. Now, Ascension of Duran is by no means unique in this aspect, but it is yet another campaign that suffers from the same things. The shoddy story and the unspell-checked grammar add insult to injury when it comes to the really brain-dead gameplay. The level design, including teleporters in the micro levels are so linear and so easy to make good, insofar as you're trying to make something that the player actually has to express skill in and doesn't have to backtrack in. That's good relative to micro missions. Not in an objective sense, because none of them have been good, but that's about as good as you're gonna fucking get in a context of people actually trying to make Blizzard-style micro missions. And yet he made them with acidine backtracking, and the ones in Ascension of Duran just ended up making me shit campaign this EXE, play it at a faster game speed than normal, hold down the plus button, and these static enemies did fucking nothing. I was fast forwarding minutes at a time within the time span of 5 or 10 seconds to regenerate all of my life and HP, because that's the only thing that's difficult about this, is waiting enough time. Of course I'm not going to be engaged, and no, I'm not going to feel respected, and no, I don't give a fuck about what's happening when you don't engage me in the slightest, when you don't even try to make it something that I have to worry about. And I'm not talking about making it grindy and boring and take forever and be tedious by placing a bunch of shit that I'm going to have to clear. What I'm talking about is an actual AI that will challenge me, that will compete for my time, that will make me say, this isn't working out. I'm going to have to try a new strategy. I'm going to have to poke and prod and figure out what the fuck I need to do. No, there's never anything like this in custom content, as far as I'm aware, other than what I've made and a few others in my server have made. But that doesn't excuse it. Just because it's what I expect doesn't mean it's what you should be aiming for. And it doesn't mean that in an era where AI editing was public and publicly documented and available for literally anybody on campaigncreations.org, where Whiplash said that he was housed while making this campaign and openly admits to having an internet presence over there, that really just adds a little bit of salt in the wound. The wound created by me playing this. The wound in my brain. Ass of Duran. Samir Penis strikes again. It is a campaign series that will not compete for your time, but at the very least it'll be over soon, particularly if you happen to shit campaign the EXE the way I did by adding the AI debug plugin and speeding up through the macro sections, the micro sections. The macro sections simply cannot be sped up beyond building a billion skitterers, or skippers, or whatever the fuck they're called. Those skippers, I believe a reference to anime in the form of Vision of the Future, end up winning you the last mission of the first campaign. And they are replaced by triggers, because even though it's not difficult to enable new units from Larva and set up the button in Firegraft, which he did use to give Duran new abilities every single time you clicked on him, he still couldn't figure out how to make Scourge skippers, or he wanted to make them that for one mission, which would also have been possible had he simply given a button there for skippers and a button for Scourge, and then disabled skippers in every mission and disabled Scourge in the one he wanted skippers enabled. That is literally all he had to do. Anybody can do this. This was documentable. This was something that was out there for anybody to see if you just paid attention. You could have also figured it out yourself if you tried. You already know how to change buttons. All you would have had to do is right-click and copy and change 2 unit ID values, and maybe if you were feeling extra spicy, you could have changed a string to refer to a custom string that said build skipper instead of morph to Scourge. But you didn't do that. Instead, you wasted my time with triggers that broke rally points, so basic functionality of the game, and were done so in a way that there were no hypertriggers present, so of course I have to wait for your triggers to find each individual Scourge. Fantastic. You win. Except you don't win. All you win is a review on my channel, once again immortalized as a thankfully forgettable piece of content. It's disgusting that I even have to refer to this as content. I hope you make the right decision, Whiplash. I hope you decide to either use it as an example of what not to do and try to radically change Ascension of Duran Remastered, or leave it well enough alone and go find something else to do. Something that I hope you will find excellence at, and something I hope you will find happiness with, rather than tainting my life.